Make your move. 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 Move. Make your move. Make your move. Make your move. Move. Make your move.
For the climate.
Good morning and welcome to another Friends of Europe online event. My name is Joe Litobarski. I'm the editor of Debating Europe, which is Friends of Europe's online citizen engagement platform. And today we are talking about co-designing transport systems with citizens. How can we get citizens involved in solving the sustainable mobility question? It's going to be a really nice debate. I've got a fantastic lineup of speakers and I'm going to really encourage audience participation. But first of all, some housekeeping. You know, it's been a year and a half. You guys know how to do this. Make sure you mute your microphones before you speak. There's a raise hand function in Zoom, so just make sure to put that up, and I know that you'll want to come in with a question. So if you think of a question or a comment, one of my colleagues will bring you in. If you can put your full name in the chat as well, in your bio underneath your video, and turn your cameras on, please. I want to see you. Also, there's a lovely chat function. We really want you to kind of be sending each other messages, be kind of putting in links if there's anything that supports your argument. So please use the chat function. That's fantastic. And very much kind of, as I said, participate, take part, but please keep your interventions short. I want to get as many people involved as possible. So if you do have something to say, keep it short. Okay, housekeeping out of the way. Let's move on to the debate. We're here to talk about how to involve citizens in transport solutions. And we've just had Car Free Sunday in Brussels. We're in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow. Mobility is going to be really key to bringing down Europe's, to meeting its targets, bringing down its carbon emissions. We know that over 25% of CO2 emissions in the EU are from the transport sector. Big chunk of that is from road transport. So this is going to be key, but you also need to involve citizens. You're going to have to involve citizens. This event is taking part in the context of something called the Climate Pact, which is an attempt to kind of mobilize citizens, bring citizens into the kind of struggle against climate change so that we can have a green transition with citizens. And that's through, for example, as a platform pledging to reduce your own emissions, to change your behavior through driving less, through cycling more, through flying less, through eating less meat, but also becoming more active in your community, raising awareness, becoming active in the political process. And this is really what the debate today is about. How can we bring citizens into the political process, into the policy-making process, so that we're co-designing alongside citizens? Because we saw what happened in France. We saw the Gilets jaunes, we saw the backlash when policies were enacted with the best of intentions, but there was a popular backlash. There was not a sense that there was citizen involvement. And President Macron then convened citizens' assemblies. He had a grand national debate, listened to citizens, consulted with citizens, and brought their opinions in. And I suppose the thesis of this event today is if you have the consultation first, if you begin with the consultation, maybe you can avoid the backlash. So perhaps if we consult citizens first, if we bring them in to the process. Okay, so having said that, let's move on to, first of all, as you saw a video at the beginning, do pledge, I think my colleague's going to put a link to the pledging platform in the chat, and also we'll make sure that there is in the description, there's a link to this. Do pledge. I think it does make a difference if you signal what you're going to do in your lives to try to make a difference. So please follow the link and pledge on the platform. But we'll start now with the Mayor of Warsaw, who is joining us. We've got Rafał Trzaskowski, Mayor of Warsaw and European Climate Pact Ambassador in Poland. Mayor Rafał, are you here? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
Wonderful.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from Warsaw.
Okay, so I'm really happy that you're joining us. I know that you only have a short moment with us. You'll have to leave in about 20 minutes. But I want to hear your thoughts on how we can bring citizens. I mean, Warsaw's a major European city. You've got diverse mobility needs for its citizens. What are your thoughts on bringing citizens into the decision-making process when you're designing transport to meet their mobility needs?
Well, I mean, of course, it is essential to bring the citizens into the process, and we are doing it. We are doing surveys, we are doing consultations, and we have even introduced a citizens panel. We have introduced it on energy saving, but we include all of those tools when we talk about public transportation. By the way, citizens panel means that, we choose a panel of citizens who actually decide things that should be done in the city, and then we treat them as a signpost for the future, and we try to implement it. So we do all of that. And of course, it is incredibly important to include the citizens in consultations. And also, public transportation is one of our most important priorities because we want to be climate neutral by 2050. We are the only Polish city which declared that. I mean, considering our energy mix in our country, that's pretty ambitious. And of course, public transportation is one of the most important goals which is going to help us achieve the overall priority. But there's one important but. I mean, consultations and surveys and including the citizens, it's incredibly important. But first, awareness and education must be implemented. Why? Because, for us, people who are concentrating on these goals, I mean, of course, it is obvious that you cannot reach climate neutrality, that you cannot improve the quality of air if you do not invest in public transportation, if you do not treat it as a priority. But for many people, it is not that clear. And for example, in Warsaw, 41% of the people use public transportation, 34% use only cars. And if you tell them, let's invest in public transportation, they all say, okay. But if you tell them, let's prioritize public transportation, then you run into quite a lot of problems because quite a lot of people in Warsaw are against narrowing the streets. They would want, wider streets. They would want more parking places in the center of the city. And they do not get the overall picture. They do not get all the links. And you need to simply explain to the people what are you planning and why are you, for example, prioritizing public transportation? Why are you, in certain instances, narrowing the streets? Why you are taking cars out of the city center? Because without such an explanation, it is difficult to convince the people. And moreover, you need to demonstrate it. What we are doing, for example, we are taking one square of the city, we're taking cars away from it. At the beginning, people are protesting because the parking places have been eliminated, but then they see that such a square, when you open up restaurants, when you put greenery in, that they gain a new public square or public place, and then they start liking it. Similarly, we start doing it with certain streets. We put biking lanes and so on in order to demonstrate the effect. So in conclusion, first of all, you need awareness and education exercises so that people know what you're talking about, that you explain your priorities. Then you show by example what are the real effects of some of the measures that you do. And then you do consultations, then you do surveys and maybe even citizens panel in order to include the people and consult them. And then, of course, you implement the decisions. So yes, by all means, let's involve the citizens, let's consult them. There is no other way around that. But at the beginning, you need to explain your motives, you need to demonstrate the effects, and you need to simply teach by doing and learn by doing. That's the recipe.
I think that's a really nice toolbox that you've set out there, which other cities maybe. I know that other cities are implementing similar approaches. I want to ask you, what has been the reaction from residents in Warsaw? You said that you've held some citizen panels. Has it been positive? I mean, there is often a kind of criticism of citizen panels that, we elect representatives, who are these citizens who are kind of feeding into the process. Have there been any tensions or has it been a positive experience in Warsaw with the citizens panels?
Well, I mean, you cannot ask about everything. And I mean, if you ask a very general question, then of course you run into difficulties. What we've decided to do, we've done a citizens panel on energy efficiency, a very concrete thing that we wanted to establish, the public's opinion view. And then it can really help. Of course, sometimes the city councillors are grumbling that, they're the ones who should take the decisions. But if you are very precise in what you're asking the citizens panel, then I think it can be a win-win situation. But on difficult issues, more difficult, more controversial issues, such as taking away the cars from the city center, or in certain cases prioritizing public transportation, you need more conversation. You need more awareness. And at the end of the day, it is all about demonstration. I mean, I remember when we were changing, some of the thoroughfares going through the city into pedestrian zones, or we were slowing down traffic, or we were prioritizing public transportation, it was always incredibly controversial. But when the people saw that, the city is changing, that they can walk, that, the cities sort of like, as I call them, the islands of activity are being stitched together, then they see the result, and then slowly the public opinion changes. And then you consult about where you should do the same, or where maybe you should do it differently. You ask what are the good consequences, what are eventually bad consequences, if there are any, what could be improved, and then people really feel included and consulted. When you first demonstrate, when you educate, when you have an open conversation, and of course, when you treat consultations in a serious manner.
Okay, thank you very much. And I appreciate you have to go. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker. I'll bring in Janet Veldstra, who's assistant professor in psychology at the University of Groningen, who's going to talk maybe about some of these, the kind of psychology of communication, I suppose. How do we encourage people, talk about the benefits, the co-benefits, instead of the sacrifices, as Rafał was saying. Janet, welcome.
Thank you, Joe, for introducing me so nicely.
So what do you, please?
Yeah, so I was listening to Mayor Rafał, and I'm amazed that in Warsaw, they're already so far in engaging citizens, and actually also using psychology and psychological therapy, theories, probably without even knowing it. But that's an excellent example, actually. And I was thinking, that indeed it's very important. We also find in our research to educate and create awareness. But we also find that usually indeed, as Mayor Rafał says, it's not enough, because people usually are aware of climate change more than we think, actually. But often they are not aware of what they can do about it. So it's not tangible for them. They only indeed feel cost, and they don't feel benefits, or they feel that they can't actually do everything that's asked of them. So showing what the benefits are is indeed an excellent example of engaging people and showing them that that is also something that is for them.
It seems to me that there's maybe, we were talking a bit about this in the speaker briefing, there may be a bit of a tension between, we know more or less what we need to do, how we need to change our behavior. We need to diversify the mobility, our modes of transport. We need to be cycling more. We need to kind of change how we think of city centers so that there's pedestrian areas and cars, park and ride and so on. And those will require changes to people's lifestyles. But it seems that there's a tension between consulting people and then the kind of, these are the sort of scientifically led outcomes that we want to arrive at. And perhaps, when I think of behavioral psychology, one of the things I think of is these policy nudges. The idea that, okay, we'll design policies in a way that even unconsciously, default behavior will result in outcomes that, we want to achieve as policymakers. Now, is there a tension between consulting people and maybe they say, actually, we don't want that, or maybe, encouraging them to self-nudge in a way when they're designing these policies? Is there a tension there, do you think?
I don't think that, actually, because the idea of nudging is that people are always free to choose another way. Nudging is not forcing people. It is just using how people behave and trying to make a choice architecture or an environment that benefits them and helps them engage in behavior that is actually better for them, but also for the planet. And the tension is in who decides what is best, right? And
yes,
that's an ethical question. So there is always a choice, but you can wonder in how far is there a choice if we're using people's unconscious behavior to move them in a certain direction. But in principle, there's always a choice. So in that sense, I don't see that there is that tension between consulting and nudging. But the ethical question is more, who decides what's best, basically.
Okay, interesting. I'll bring in the third speaker now, who is Alexandra Chandran, who's head of partnerships at CitizenLab. And perhaps we can talk a little bit about this, because CitizenLab has been running these citizens panels. As I understand it, you've been doing things at the local level as well as national level, indeed. So perhaps you can kind of come in here. What are your thoughts on what's been kind of said so far? How do you see citizens being kind of meaningfully involved in the kind of policy-making process when we're kind of designing transport systems?
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. I think really resonates what's already been said. And I think with CitizenLab being a community engagement platform, with a whole new wave of community engagement platforms that have come across, we have a real responsibility because we're part of reshaping the way people are engaging with governments, particularly on such vast and important issues like climate change. And something that's really important to us is to make sure that we enable cities in the right way to hone in on their goals, to understand what they tangibly want to achieve by using the platform. Seeing it as a vessel rather than seeing it as something that's a silver bullet is also really, really important. Understanding their audiences, who they want to connect with, but also recognizing how much influence they want residents, citizens to have on final decisions that get made, and understanding what that measure of success is when they do roll out community engagement projects. And so for us, with platforms, with community engagement, it's about really creating a space for communities and residents to feel a level of ownership and validation when it comes to contributing to decision making. And being able to see quite visibly and transparently how consultation processes evolve. And I think what's brilliant about this topic in particular is we've seen so much youth engagement around the topics of climate change. And using digital services, using platforms is a brilliant way to bring young people in. Not only are they inheriting the earth, but they're very in tune with technology, and they continue to raise their voices about the impact that climate change is having. And so what's essential, I think, is having that visibility and that transparency on decisions that are being made, on consultation processes that are happening, and really being able to complement online methods with offline methods when it comes to transport needs, when it comes to mobility, when it comes to ideas, opinions on and worries on climate change. Whether that's from understanding how people use transport to what their challenges are using transport. And there's a whole host of different ways of doing that online and offline, whether that's using a mapping tool, ideation, bringing citizen panels on an online workshop. So it's a vast field where we can use a combination of methods to engage lots of different people in lots of different ways.
Okay. Speaking of engagement, we're gonna have some questions soon. We're gonna have questions from the audience, so please think of your questions, and also hopefully we'll have some questions coming from viewers on the live stream. Perhaps people will be sending in questions via Twitter. They can use the hashtag FOE debate and hashtag EU Climate Pact if you want to send your questions. But first, I want to ask you, Alexandra, about your work at CitizenLab, because one of the things that CitizenLab says is that there's kind of, you have participation, which can be very, very broad, but kind of shallow, and then you can have deliberation, which is a small number of people. It can get very deep. And obviously, when you're talking about citizens panels on things like should we have a cycle path here, or should we kind of remove this on-street parking and replace it with something else? That's a small number of people. If you've got a big city, you can only have a small number of residents. So is there a kind of question of, who are these people making this decision? Like, this is maybe a controversial decision. How do you make sure that the process has kind of as much legitimacy as possible?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question. And I don't think there's any kind of one right answer to that. I think what's really important is to have a broad selection of ways that you're engaging with different resident groups. I think citizen panels is one aspect, and it provides a fantastic and really, really structured way of diving deep into a particular subject. But I think it's also really important to use additional engagement methods, whether that's running surveys across the whole city, whether that's getting as many people on an online platform to bring in their ideas about plans for transport and mobility. I think it's important to have a variety of different engagement methods. One, to provide that level of connection that people have with their city, to feel like they are part of the city, they're contributing to something, it's a city that they want to live in and drive forward. And two, having these citizen panels that have a great level of legitimacy, especially if they are planned and structured in a way that the citizens feel really informed, other citizens who are more observers of the process feel fully informed, but also understanding what is the outcome of these citizen panels, what's going to influence a decision or what's going to inform a decision or directly impact a decision. So I think it's really important to think of these things in the round and have a holistic approach as possible.
Interesting. Okay, now we're going to go to some questions. Again, raise your hand if you want to come in from the audience. There's a raise hand function on Zoom at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can ask a question. And hopefully please do ask some questions, because we had a lot of kind of food for thought, I think, some really interesting kind of debate so far. Do we have any questions from the audience? Or from Twitter, or perhaps Deborah wants to come in with questions from Debating Europe?
Yes. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Joe. So yes, we have a question from Laura, Italy. She says, if you live in the countryside, it's harder to give up a car than if you live in a big city. So it's not fair. And what would you say to her?
This is kind of at the heart of the debate, isn't it, really? Janet, can I maybe bring you in? Like, this question of fairness, I think, is really, and when we talk about a transition to sustainable mobility systems, fairness is going to be really key. How do you ensure that even if there are difficult decisions, it's again this question of legitimacy, I suppose, even if there are difficult decisions made, that there is a sense that that the process is fair, the outcomes are fair? How do you think you can do that when you're consulting with citizens?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. But fairness is also a question of perception. So in this case, the question is about, I live in the countryside and I can't give up my car because it's harder for me. But someone in the city might say have the same perception, although the perception of you would be, that's why would that be unfair? Because it is a perception of not only economic cost, but also cognitive cost, or the cost of time, which should be thought of when you make changes. So in this case, you could say, maybe you need a car, but do you need a private car? Can you maybe share a car? So I think if you involve citizens, you can ask them, how can we make this change together without giving you the feeling that it will cost you extra time, or cost you extra money, or if it costs you, what will it bring you, right? To have that conversation.
Okay, so this is what Rafał was saying at the beginning, Mayor of Warsaw, like emphasize the kind of benefits, the co-benefits, don't kind of focus on the costs. Klaus, I see you have your hand up if you could.
I don't agree with that, actually.
Oh, please.
You need to be honest. Yeah,
okay.
You need to be honest about the cost.
Okay.
Because we need to be fair if we want to do this well. If we want to change for climate change, it will cost us, but it will also benefit us. Only the difficulty is the benefit is on the long run, which is really hard for people to internalize, right? We can do something if a benefit is closer by. I think we've seen it also in the COVID situation. We can change behavior. if we feel that it is important. But the longer COVID was, the more difficult it was for people to keep the behavior because the urgency was lowered, right?
I think that's an important point.
So,
Klaus, I'd
yeah.
like to bring you in. You have your hand up. Do you want to introduce yourself and then ask your question? And please keep it brief.
Yes, thanks for giving me the floor. Klaus Boele, I work for the Committee of the Regions on rural issues. And that's why I wanted to connect to the previous question. I think it's not, well, one thing is the methodology. How do you, when you devise mobility plans in cities, how do you also involve citizens that use your transport but do not live in the city? So that's one thing. And the other thing is on the content. It's not just about private transport. It's also about workers and so on coming into the city. A personal example, I live in Brussels and I now have less choice when I want to renovate my house to find workers, because many workers who live in the outskirts of Brussels, they say, because of the new traffic situation, I don't come there anymore. So they lose a market and I lose the choice. So I think we also have to think a bit broader than just personal or private traffic.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Alexandra, perhaps I could have your response to that. Particularly, I think what struck me from Klaus's the first part of his question was, what do we, when we consult in a city, what do we consider the city? Because you have different mobility needs in the countryside around a city, and they also might have to kind of come into the city. I live in Maastricht in the Netherlands, and you have different borders. Maastricht itself is more than just the city. It is also the kind of areas around people coming into the city. So when you do a consultation, when you have a kind of an exercise, how do you determine who is going to be consulted?
I think it's a really important point. And I think this is where we need to go back to just more broadly improving consultation processes, regardless whether that's online or offline. This is about how do we engage with people and how do we engage people from a vast array of places. I mean, just taking my experience of having lived in London, living in the south of England, and the massive disparity that you had between the transport networks in the south of England versus the north of England. And that became such an enormous issue for people, from getting to work to getting to hospitals and so on and so forth, understanding when the next best bus was coming, not being able to rely on certain timetables or having that data online. So I think it's about getting down to the nitty-gritty of who is this consultation serving? What exactly are we trying to achieve here? I think that's it. That's really the nuts and bolts of it. What are the goals? What is our measure of success? Is it being able to bring workers into Brussels more easily from outer areas? It's about supporting the economy. It's about reviving things after COVID. I think it's really, what are the goals? What are our measures of success, and how do we go about doing that and engaging people from as broad a spectrum as possible, or making it more specific because it's affecting this particular group of people?
I think it's an important point. If I could ask a follow-up, this question of having a broad spectrum approach, diversity, bringing in as many different kind of opinions and perspectives as possible, I think there is, when you are designing any kind of deliberative or participatory engagement method, there's a kind of almost a social justice question, I suppose, because Rafał was saying at the beginning, there's need to educate and to kind of engage, and some of these processes can take several weeks. A citizens panel, for example, could take several weeks. So you could recruit a very diverse mix of citizens, and then you see that retention rates, the people who end at the big end of the process might be the people with lots of time on their hands, people who are kind of have a kind of a higher level of the socioeconomic background and so on. And that, again, starts to raise questions of fairness, who is not just who is joining the process, but who's staying to the end of the process if it's a long process. How do you kind of address some of these questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we can look at models like the Oost-Belgian model that really thought very carefully, and I'm sure a number of other citizen panels thought very carefully about making sure they had financial provisions in place for people who were stepping away from work, who had childcare needs, who had people to care for at home. So being able to provide financial stipends for people, being able to provide to people's needs, to allow people to be on a really truly equal level when it comes to contributing. I think that's something that's essential and something that often gets left out. We kind of see equal opportunities as being a default situation, and that's absolutely not the case. We really need to help people and put people in a position of being able to contribute in an inclusive way if we want to get that diversity of opinion in these consultation processes.
Okay, Ethem, I see that you've got your hand up. If you could introduce yourself and then ask your question, please.
Sure, thank you. I'm Pekin, working for the Community of European Railways as the head of economic policy and sustainability. So here I would like to maybe zoom in to how we can decarbonize without also leaving no one really behind. As you know, with the Fit for 55, there are a number of proposals on the EU legislative to tackle the transport emissions. Here, with the Climate Pact especially, we should be reaching to the society as large and also not really the persons with private and carbon-intensive mobility options or people who depend on them, but also the shippers and also as the end users of products with our online habits of consumption, especially these days, is that some subject I really work, which is the eco-label. We know the labels, we know the carbon footprint, so a lot of things are on the side of methodology, and that is organized a lot at the EU level. And my question for reflection with the panelists is actually how the EU can do this with more effective to address all transport modes with a uniform, harmonized approach, and then make sure that the carbon footprint of our choices are known by everyone, and then have the incentive to switch to more sustainable options. So this is something I personally work on behalf of CR, and I would like to hear your views, the feasibility, and how this can be used for decarbonization. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have some speakers who I'm going to bring in soon who I think are going to be really good at answering this question. So I'm going to kind of sit on that. I will put it to the panel to see if they want to kind of weigh on it as well. But I want to bring in some other speakers too. There's a couple of questions also that come in from the chat. One from Carlo, who says transport on demand has a large potential. Furthermore, it's not all or nothing. The issue is integrating via park and ride, private and public transport, I'd say. And then also Sylvie, who says, when looking at Brussels, where 50% of the workforce are commuters, obviously you need to include them if setting up an urban mobility plan rather than focusing only on the citizens of Brussels. I think those are really kind of interesting points. I want to bring in some more speakers to the debate, actually, because I think, Ethem, I'm not ignoring your question. I'm going to kind of bring some more voices in. Let's bring in László Mátyus, who's the Director of Innovation and Service Development at the Public Transport Company of Debrecen in Hungary. László, are you there?
I'm right here. Hello, everyone.
Hi, László. So also maybe I can put this question from Ethem to you, in fact, because I think that might be interesting. We're talking about different modes of transport, and obviously we've been talking about kind of public transport, I think citizen-focused transport, car transport, and so on. But there's lots of different modes of transport. Clearly, I mean, if we want to decarbonize, we're going to have to look at rail. We're going to have to look at electrification of kind of freight. You're going to have to look at shipping and air travel and so on. It's all of this is fantastically kind of complicated. Clearly, your experience has taught you that communication is really vital. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
When we started our smart city activities, that dates back to 2016. And in fact, this is what we started with, trying to involve the public. So when we started, we didn't, here you have on my little roll up here in the back, the focus areas we were aiming at the beginning, those were defined together during Smart City meetups, where we invited professionals, also from the private sector, from the university. All these debates were open to public, which we tried to hold on at least on a bi-weekly basis or on a monthly basis, trying to understand what's important in terms of smart city for the whole world, what could be important for us, for Debrecen. And there were, of course, lots of good ideas, but it's pretty difficult to try to make progress in all areas. So you had to focus, and that's why we narrowed down our focus areas down to 3, and mobility was always on top of them. When we were having these open discussions, starting from a blank page, our experience was it was pretty difficult for people to understand what they would really actually like and what would bring them the most benefits to them. It was much easier to get feedback and get reflections on already introduced measures and projects. Within Smart City, we always introduce obviously something that's new and innovative. So it was always good to have this platform where we can have instant feedback that did we reach our goals? Did really those measures bring the effect that we wished on? And it's much easier for people to choose than if they have scenario A or B, which one would they prefer, than rather just really having open discussions, because then it's really easy for people to get carried away, and it's obviously then more difficult as a city leader to find which are those which you can really implement and which would bring the best benefit for society as a whole. And besides these smart city meetups, another very important lesson which I would like to mention was that it's, of course, within our department and our colleagues, we most of the times try to understand the problem and try to find a solution. Many times, technical solutions or changes in things we do, but it doesn't really make a difference if it doesn't reaches the public as you would wish. A very good example was that, okay, we don't get this wrong. Main priority is the active transport modes and public transportation, but we cannot ignore there are many people still using cars. Car traffic will still be one of the most dominant modes in our cities for still quite some time, maybe excluding the city center, but as a whole, it will be still very important. So a couple of years ago, we signed a strategic partnership with the largest community-based navigation app. And we found out that it could be extremely helpful. It's a data exchange program where we update everything what we know and affects traffic on the navigation app. So users have up-to-date real-time information about everything, all closures, anything, unexpected events whatsoever. And in return, they provide us and feedback all the data. And of course, the more users you have, the more reliable the whole system is, the more data we have, what we can use on coming up with further traffic development recommendations. And everything was perfect in theory. But when we went out to the field and really started asking people sitting in their cars, it was pretty easy to find 10 or 15 people in a row who haven't even heard about this possibility. And then we thought that, okay, now it's great that we have a database. It's great that we have the solution and we have the whole workflow and figure out what we would do with the data and really on the technical side. But if it doesn't reach the public, it's really not going to make its effect. So then we contacted schools. We asked the help of students who had to do their mandatory work hours, which they can do in the public institutes. And we went really out on the field. So we targeted shopping malls, city squares, really busy places, gave them tablets where we showed them that whoever comes around with different small little prizes and contests, we tried to encourage people to know about this strategic partnership, download the application, try using them, to help them. And within after a couple of weekends, I think 3 or 4, we managed to triple the number of users what we had, which already brought the attention of this application development team, the owner of the application, that there's something in Debrecen going on which is not really well known around the world, that suddenly there's a huge peak without any online advertising activities. Because the problem was with online advertisement was that probably we would be reaching the same user group who knows about it anyway. So if we want to expand, we have to do it the hard way and then really go out on the field and get to the public and really grab their hands and get the chance to show them and talk about them.
Interesting.
Sorry about
and what I want
Go
to
ahead.
ask you a question, because this is fascinating. It's really inspirational. I think there's some really excellent stuff in there. The question I wanted to ask you is, though, you sort of said that it's important to kind of educate the people who you're bringing along in this process, and you argued that you can set out two scenarios, like A or B, rather than leaving it wide open. Was there kind of pushback against that, though? Were people like, oh, I wanted scenario C, or I would like to do it a different way, or did people appreciate actually having a set of options to pick from?
They rather appreciate it. So
okay.
Most of the times they were topics that have been already brought up earlier. So if you start from something that they hear for the first time, it's more difficult, because then they start to think about it. Is this really good, or would the other one be better, or maybe something else? But if you already communicate that up front, then they can already prepare for the question, which would benefit them the more. I think it's also part of change management to really have a lot of communication up front, and even if then you're going to do something that might not benefit everyone, they won't get it by surprise. So let's say if it's really constantly in the news, people talking about it on the websites everywhere for weeks, months, whatsoever, and then suddenly the change happens, then they just really just go along, and then they won't be resistant. You won't hear those loud voices, because they would be saying, okay, what's the topic about? I mean, we've been knowing this for a year, so what's the big deal? Let's keep on going. Otherwise, well, if you just bring it up suddenly, then it might be still a shock for a large group of citizens or people.
And then you may get a backlash, as we saw in France.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is a fantastic debate. We're almost out of time. We've got 20 minutes left, so we're coming to the end of the debate. I want to bring in here Yvon Slingenberg, who is the Acting Director for Climate Strategy, Governance and Emissions from Non-Trading Sectors at the European Commission, DG for Climate Action. And Yvon, thank you very much for being with us. The reason that we have given you the slot at the end is not, I said in the speaker briefing, it's not a reflection of seniority. We wanted to put you at the end because we wanted the debate to feed into your kind of time, so that you hear this discussion that we've had first. And this is really, I think, what we're talking about, the topic of the debate is how can we get kind of the discussion and the deliberation first, and then that goes into the policy-making process. So, what are you doing? I mean, the Commission has got a raft of measures that it's introducing on sustainable mobility, but what are you doing to make sure that citizens are the starting point?
Thank you very much, Joe, and good morning, everyone. I'm basically quite lucky because indeed I've already been able to listen to all these very, very interesting interventions. So thanks for that. And I also wanted to say a specific thanks to Friends of Europe to organize this and to be so active in the context of the Climate Pact. That is really much appreciated. So yeah, the debate of this morning is very instructive even for us, because as you know, and I was thinking during the discussions that in the European Commission, as you said, Joe, I mean, we do policy making. We try to put in place a policy framework and a regulatory framework most of the time that gives an indication to all sectors of society as to where we need to be going. I listened carefully to Janet, who was saying, look, it's an ethical question, who decides what's best. But of course, this is also at EU level. It's something that we do jointly. Member states in the Council, we have the European Parliament, we have the Committee of the Regions, we have the social partners also in the Committee for Economic and Social Committee. So that is, of course, what we do. But I think we are, in the context of climate change, we are in a situation whereby we're indeed looking at such huge transformational change that needs to happen. I mean, you all know we have now got the agreement and the binding obligation for Europe to become climate neutral in 2050. We have a major step up in ambition in order to reduce our emissions to minus 55% by 2030. And this is not much time, left to actually do that. And it does require big changes. I mean, sometimes you can talk technologies, okay, that's all very nice, but I think in this particular context, we all agree that it will be impacting everybody's lives, and that's where we need to get out there. We need to talk to the citizens, and for us, at least for me, it was very, very interesting to hear what is already happening, because this is not something you can really orchestrate from Brussels. I think what is great, and clearly our president, Mrs. von der Leyen, already had this vision when she put forward her priorities for her mandate to put in place the Climate Pact. That's exactly the purpose. We want to try and reach out and engage with all sectors of society. And again, as László was thinking also, I mean, for us, a big challenge is always to go beyond the usual interlocutors, because the people who are, on board to combat climate change, who are already taking a lot of action, that is, of course, great. And we need to definitely continue that. And that's, I think, also what the pact is driving on a lot. But at the same time, we need to go beyond. And indeed, also to what you were saying, László, in terms of, communication up front, not take people by surprise. So I think from what our perspective, what we try to do is push and pull. I mean, we need to push certain people. And there I do, of course, have to mention, indeed, like others have done already, our new package, Fit for 55, where, for example, we have pretty strict new CO2 standards for cars coming through. So that will start having an impact on the market, because, of course, again, if you start discussing, okay, we will still have cars on the street and people need their car, well, fine, but you can also make those cars non-polluting and non-CO2 emitting. So that's definitely the direction we're heading in. But at the same time, this will take time. So all the more diverse activities that can help to switch to other modes of transport, to indeed show how great a city can be in terms of walking, cycling, all these kind of shared modes of transport. And also to the gentleman from CER, I mean, of course, I hope that everybody by now knows that, taking the train is much better than taking a plane. But all these things do need to be communicated. And indeed, I think the trick is in providing alternatives, showing the benefits. I was just clicking on the link that you shared. I think that is already a very good info sheet. You kind of recap, okay, why are we doing this? What are the alternatives? What are the benefits? And then I think this whole notion of discussing with citizens comes in, because then indeed it's about choices. Okay, what are their needs? How do they, what preference do they have in terms of different options? And I think that is then indeed key in order to, to have this ownership, to have this buy-in of the changes that are going to be coming. So I can only commend, and I really was thinking during the debate that, I mean, we need to find ways to bring all these great actions that are already happening to the people. Because even me, and of course, somebody also said the urgency. I think it was, also Janet or Alexandra, yes, after the summer, when you've seen the fires and the floods and all that, that's really super worrying. But, then it drifts away and we all go back, we see it with COVID as well. We always all go back to a little bit, business as usual from before. So it is very, very important right now to keep this urgency and to show that, yes, a lot of things can be done. And final point, maybe on the rural areas. I mean, I fully understand that people are super worried there. And indeed, like you said, Joe, I mean, with the Gilets jaunes, this has been brought to our attention. So there again, we need to engage, because, we need to work with people and discuss with people what the other options are. And then maybe final point, because in our package Fit for 55, we have also, of course, proposed carbon pricing for fuels, the fuels used in transport and in the heating of buildings. So we are very aware of the fact that will mean additional cost. Of course, there are ways for member states to balance those costs. You can also look at your taxation, etc. But notably, we have put forward, and I think somebody also said it will have cost. This transition will have cost, but it's a choice. Where do you put your expenditure? But we have proposed to put in place a social climate fund to really work with member states to mitigate the impacts for the low-income households and for the vulnerable groups. So those who are already suffering from energy poverty, and if you want, transport poverty. It's not a known concept, but I mean, it is to indicate that, we're conscious of the fact that not everybody can buy an electrical vehicle. At the same time, again, it's not, we cannot do everything from Brussels, not even the institutions. We need to work with member states, and then obviously the authorities, regional, local authorities very much. And I'm really grateful for, seeing that there's so many good outfits basically out there who are already taking this super seriously and spreading the word.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're at 10 minutes now. We're almost out of time. I want to have a last round of questions, Q&A. If anyone, for any of our speakers wants to kind of ask a question on anything that has come up during the debate or to kind of make an intervention, please raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. You've got the little hand function. We've had a couple of comments that have come in on the chat. We've got one from Silky, who has said, that if you can scroll up to Silky, I can't see her comment. And we've had one just come in from Georg. Actually, no, stay where it is. I'll do Georg's comment. He says, you may also want to consider to have a look at the offerings of the Smart Cities Marketplace. Yeah, László was talking about Smart Cities, of course, which operates at the intersection of energy, transport, mobility, and ICT. Its explore, shape, deal, matchmaking process aims at bringing best practices and solutions at the fingertips of users, enabling their further rollout, upscaling, and replication with private finance. I think technology is an important point here. So when we're talking about citizen engagement, I mean, I know it's come up before, there's no technological magic bullet. We are going to need to have behavioral changes. We're going to need to have lifestyle changes. It's going to have to be a whole of society thing. But new technologies can help us consult with citizens, I think. I mean, I would say that I'm editor of an online citizen engagement platform, so I'm really keen on this. But I do think that there are, although we have to bear in mind, of course, again, this social justice thing in terms of access to technology and the digital divide and so on. So that's something to bear in mind. Janet has left a comment. It will have to cost to change to a sustainable future. Janet, why don't you come in and read your comment rather than me reading it for you? Do you want to, what was your intervention?
Yeah, well, I was actually responding to Yvon because I so agree with her. Indeed, as I said, we need to be honest. It will cost us to change to a sustainable future. It will cost us individually, and it will cost us now. But it will also cost us if we do nothing, right? But it will cost us further in the future. So these costs we will feel later. And I was saying, making that more explicit, that not doing something is also a choice that would cost us, would maybe create more urgency. So I really like what the mayor of Warsaw explained. If you show people what they're choosing, if you make a future of not making choices more tangible, just show that, and maybe that would create more urgency. That's what I was trying to say.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And I think it also, it speaks to this idea that we need to trust citizens, okay? If you're going to co-decide with them, you need to trust them. You need to set out all of the kind of the benefits, but also the dangers of doing nothing and what it will cost indeed, and then set it all out and then trust in the kind of wisdom of crowds and the wisdom of citizens, which I do think there is a push to doing that. We're moving away from this idea that you have kind of, you vote every 4 or 5 years and representatives decide. I mean, we're talking now in the context of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is ongoing. So that's a kind of big participatory exercise. And these citizens panels are becoming more popular, and different kind of consultative and deliberative and participatory processes. So I feel there is a kind of momentum. Do we have any questions from the panel before we close? Because we're almost out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left. Are there any final kind of comments or questions? Deborah, do you want to come in with something from Debating Europe, for example?
Yes, Joe, we have another question. It's Françoise from France. She says, why not make public transport free for everyone, just like in Luxembourg? How would you respond to her?
Oh, László, I'm going to put that to you. Public transport should be free. What would you say to Françoise, László?
Well, of course, the maths had to add up. So public transport is subsidized in Debrecen, just as it is in many other cities. So it's a question of a budget, practically. If you do provide public transport locally for free, then why do that? How you can only do that if you do that in all of the major cities within the country. It cannot be that, let's say, we do it in Debrecen, but we're not doing it in Budapest at the capital, or the other way around, because that will just cause more attention probably than if you keep it paid sale or as it is today. And then, of course, you then still have not just the local transport, but you can also talk about all the trains countrywide, and then it all adds up at the end.
But
so if you can.
Do you think, László,
Yes?
that the pandemic has changed the equation slightly? So you have now lower capacity. Social distancing means you've got lower capacity on public transport, and we're going into the autumn, the winter. We're not sure what's going to happen there. But also there might be a perception that it's less safe. Maybe there's less. This is. Kind of a fear of crowds of people. So maybe there's a kind of a push and a pull impact. Does that change the equation, particularly if you're talking about fairness? Public transport companies might be having to close routes to rural areas because there aren't enough ticket sales. Do you think that if we're talking about, okay, we need to cover all of these different regions, we need to cover rural and urban, maybe lesser used transport routes, but we're in after the pandemic, the equation maybe has changed a bit. Do you agree, or what's your thought on the impact of the pandemic?
We're trying not to. So our strategy is going ahead and developing and adding services and whatever we can to win back passengers. The perception of public transport has had a big hit in the past 1.5 years, although in Debrecen we haven't had any proven cases that anyone really got infected in public transport. I don't personally think that it was riskier than going shopping to any of the other retail markets. And the problem with capacity is if you start cutting down areas or cutting schedules, then you go into negative spiral, which you can't really get out of. So we're trying to do is we're having 12 new electric buses from spring. We will have 30 new diesel buses still this year. So what we can do. We were the first ones in the country who had e-ticketing introduced in Hungary, and with the possibility of a mobile app, you can now have it since the pandemic for all variety of our products. So what we're trying to do is really just go ahead with everything what we can do. Otherwise, it'll be just more costly in the long run.
And this is, again, an example of using technology to support more sustainable processes. Okay, look, we're out of time. We have to wrap it up now. I'm going to, again, call on everyone to visit the link in the chat for the Climate Pact pledge platform, so that you can pledge if you want to kind of signal that you're willing to make either a behavioral change, a kind of shift in your lifestyle, cycle more, walk more, use more public transport, or if you want to get more kind of politically active, more involved, a more engaged citizen, you can kind of sign up there. Thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you to everyone for watching at home. And I hope you tune in next time for another Friends of Europe event. This is a fascinating topic, and I'm sure there's more that we could have said, but we are out of time. Thank you all, and have a very nice rest of your day.
Make your move. 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 Move. Make your move. Make your move. Make your move. Make your move.
For the climate.
Okay.
Recording stopped.